Good afternoon, everyone. It's time for our conversation with Chris on the Buzz. We talk to Chris once a week, every Thursday, 12 to 1 p.m. Now, this week we've got a cool conversation, a relevant topic actually, and it's really important that everyone comes to awareness on this concern, this topic. And the UN has said that by 2050, if we don't reach a certain target of self-sustainable or sustainable energy generation, things like that, earth could go to a really bad state. And we are currently risking people's lives, animals lives. It's There's a lot of fires, there's a lot of floods everywhere in the world right now. And coming to control climate change, and climate change is real. So what is happening with this? Where are people putting the money to reduce this impact on the world, the negative impact that we are making on the world? How can we control this? It has to be monetized at the end of the day, right? So um, that at the end of the day is always, if there's some economic benefactor, it is the only way to, I'd say, motivate people to get something done, right, in this time and day. So we've got Chris on board. Chris is a financial analyst. He's been in the field for more than 2 decades now. Chris runs a firm in UK called CS Jones, and he'll be breaking down what ESG is and where money is going, how you can make an impact, how you should bring awareness to these topics, and what the story is. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Tim.
Nice to have you here. What have you got in store for today?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's topical, right? And we could probably expand this out into a whole series as well eventually. But ESG, people need to get involved. Climate control, we see it all the time. Well, we're actually experiencing it now. So we can go through what ESG actually is,
Yeah.
how people are looking at it in a bit of its history, because I think it's relevant. And then see how large companies, fund managers, banks, all that, how they incorporating it. Is it just a PR stunt, or is it actually something that people are doing? So yeah, it'll be interesting.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of PR stunts that the biggest companies are also still doing. I mean, by just if they're packaging something with a plastic cup and a straw, they just switch the straw to a paper straw, and they say that they're going all environment friendly, when the people forget that the whole cup alone is plastic. That's just one example, honestly. But there's so many like that, in terms of manufacturing, construction, agriculture. There's so much of pollution done, in terms of, if it's air, if it's water, if it's land, whatever it is. There's so much that is going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, we even have ESG funds that invest in Shell and BP and things like that. So it just you look under the head and it just doesn't make sense. But yeah, look, I mean, what does ESG actually mean? What does it stand for? I
Yeah.
mean, let's go. So it's an investment strategy which considers E, the environment, S, the social impact, and G, the governance. And that's governance of the company, and we can go break each of those down. So on the environmental side, what an investment company will look at is they will have in investment parlance, we have a negative and a positive screening bias, which means you either, in the negative screening, you leave companies out that don't meet certain criteria, and in positive screening, you include companies who meet certain criteria. And a fund will do one or the other. Okay. And so a negative
Yeah.
screening fund who claims ESG, or a company who claims to be ESG, who does negative screening, will say, okay, we're going to get rid of, in your example, all of our plastic cups by 2030, and we're going to go, recycled or paper or whatever. And as far as investment goes, it'll go, we won't invest in companies that sell tobacco or alcohol or petroleum or do any of those kind of either social harm or environmental harm. So that's the negative screening. And then the positive screening is, of course, well, We want to include companies who are moving towards sustainable practices. So that could be companies that may not, on the face of it, may not look like they are green companies. And these are like the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons and these kind of guys. However, they've got real policies in place, and you hope these are checked by the fund manager that are moving that company toward a more sustainable future, i.e., reducing their carbon footprint in a meaningful way, things like that.
Yeah.
It goes all the way down as well, which people need to understand is because a lot of people will go, and I see people around me here, and I'm sure you do as well, they drive an electric car and they think, oh, that's great. I say, okay, but hang on. You're plugging that into the wall. Where are you getting that electricity from the wall, right? Oh, well, I don't know. Well, you're getting it from the coal plant down the road, not down the road, but miles and miles away. And that coal plant gets its coal from an open pit mine, which, just destroys the whole eco environment around the place. And not only does that open pit mine cause an issue by burning the coal in the coal plant, there's all these heavy machinery that diesel run that's busy taking this out. And so you can go down that thing. So raw materials. And going back to almost where this comes from is also an important thought process in ESG, because if you've got a fund manager looking after a large amount of money and they're distributing those funds to companies on a sustainable basis, because that's the advert, and you don't want them to be a PR, you want it to be an actual sort of tool for change, then you've also got to make sure. And it's difficult, right? So it's getting easier because we're getting more tools. As it gets more traction, we're getting more tools. But at the moment, you've actually got to do some research yourself and go and have a look at it. But yeah, so the environmental is quite important, as we all know. But then the other two, people don't really look at because they're quite difficult to look at. So the social is anti-corruption, human trafficking, human rights, local communities, working conditions, those kinds of things. So, we had that whole debacle around Apple, right? And the child factories and things like that, child labor and things like that. But hang on, is that actually a social thing? Because now you say, okay, children shouldn't work. However, in that country, if the child doesn't work, a whole family starves. So there's quite a quandary there. So that it's very difficult to ascertain that. Human rights are on the kind of trafficking side are a little bit easier to deal with because, with refugees and things like that. And of course, anti-corruption. Anti-corruption is a big thing. We don't see it all, but the corruption we do see, these funds won't invest money in those companies. It doesn't help at the moment, but hopefully it will, as more and more money goes through. And then, of course, governance. Now, governance is difficult for the layperson to have a look at because public companies, we go through all the annual reports, we go through the management accounts, we go through, and it's a lot of information and a lot of it's technical. And that gives us a kind of an understanding of what the governance of the company should be. But you'll never know unless you're in the company. I mean, there's hundreds of examples, Enron being one of the biggest, where the governance was so bad and it was so corrupt that it eventually fell over. But, you can look at Tim Cook's notices for Apple and say, okay, that company looks good. They've even got an award for, best company to work at and things like that. However, employees in that company may have a different view. We heard of Amazon warehouses, where it wasn't good. So it kind of leads to that. We also go deeper. So we go for, has the company got a code of ethics? I mean, do they have a framework for how they behave when they're not looked at? I mean, because that's integrity as well. And board independence is also important. Most people don't realize this, but when we look at their board of directors, we want to make sure that there's independent or non-executive directors in there that are not beholden to that board or to the shareholders of that company. Why? Because that removes the conflict of interest and it ensures that the company behaves in a certain way, i.e. not a bad way just for its shareholders. So that's an important strategy as well. And then, of course, you may not think about this, but we also look in a governance scenario, we look at the tax strategy of the company. So is the company efficient, and are they paying their taxes correctly? And are they, because if you pay your taxes as a company and it goes to a good government, because we're assuming good countries here, that builds communities because that can be used for the right purposes. So it's quite a broad thing. And then it comes full circle round to, we go back into the social. So are you contributing to the local communities positively? And if you are, is that in an environmentally safe way? So ESG, it packs quite a lot into that little acronym. So there's quite a lot.
That's correct.
And assessing it is difficult because we're not just valuing a company on its accounts here, we're valuing a company on its actions. And it's important because we have to do it. You're right, climate change is done, dusted. I don't know if you've seen the climate change countdown clock on Sky. I think they've got this countdown clock. So what it's counting down to is 1.5% raise in temperature.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they worked it out, but there's this whole clock, and it's saying we had 1.22. I think we saw the other day. And it says in 11 years, I can't remember the exact figures I saw there, but in 11 years' time, we're going to get to 1.5%.
I think even the Paris Climate Agreement was, a main goal of it, or the purpose of it, is to limit the increment of temperature by maximum 2 degrees at least till 2050, right? Because if we surpass that, that is our critical point.
So Sky was saying 1.5% was the point of no return.
Okay.
So
because as it is, things are pretty bad, right? Like mountains are mountains in the Alps are melting. Sea levels are rising. There's droughts that are starting. I think Madagascar is to announce their first famine. And there's so many floods going on around everywhere, and the fires in Amazon, in Australia, so many
heat waves in Siberia. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so it is pretty bad. It's I don't know, I just can't imagine what the thought process is that in people that don't accept that climate change is real, or that still act like it's just a joke. It's it's a serious problem, and people need to act on it altogether instead of just talking about it.
Exactly. And I think, not to be cynical, I think the easiest way to do it, as you alluded to, is through being able to get a return on investment while helping the environment without actually having to be active in it, right? So investing in an ESG fund, and we're seeing these funds obtaining returns because some of the funds are actually doing quite well as we get traction in things like alternative energy, new battery technologies, things like this.
Yeah.
But it's still a long way. It's a long way from reversing climate change, but it is something, and I'm starting to chat about it with clients more and more. I had a discussion with one of the top ESG fund managers yesterday, and they are seeing inflows again, because it waxes and wanes. Because before, I don't know if we go back to a bit of a history with the carbon emissions or the carbon token market, where they were swapping carbon tokens between countries. And what that meant was that a country that produced a lot of CO2 emissions could go to another country that didn't produce CO2 emissions and buy their CO2 emission allocation, and still continue to pump out carbon. So that's gone, thank God, and it's it's now being replaced by ESG. The problem with ESG that we have at the moment within the finance industry is, how do we know it's PR, and how do we know it's an actual tool for change? And I think that's the critical point. We are developing tools, as I said, and tools are being developed where companies are going to be asked this information because they're not, and they don't have to give it, to be fair. Even a public company doesn't have to give this information. A lot of it we can kind of glean, but is it the truth? You never know. So the more tools that get developed for this, and the more widely spread they are, the easier it'll be. Because if, as a layperson, you could go online now and you can see the rating of fund managers and investment funds and various stocks, right? but nowhere does it have an ESG rating or a green rating, or those kind of things. So if we got that in to say, okay, you've got 5 funds here. This one is a normal fund and it gives you 10% return and it's got a red rating, i.e. it doesn't have any criteria for climate change built into its investment strategy, all the way down to this is your greenest fund. It's still giving you 10% as an example. Let's not take that as a differentiator. However, it is a fully ESG fund that gives its whole onus and its whole investment strategy is to affect climate change in a positive way. And I think if people had those choices, we would see they're acting anyway by proxy, because those fund managers there are then channeling the money correctly. So we don't even have to. So that'll,
And when you talk about, when you talk about analyzing, or when you talk about, management in terms of understanding what impact people are actually, or companies for that matter, are actually, making towards the environment. How are these being calculated? What numbers are governments or whoever is monitoring these taking from, the companies, and, how are these going to be measured? I'm pretty sure once, these measurements and incentives come into play, that is what is honestly going to really shift the motivation towards moving positive. And I've been listening to Chamath Palihapitiya, this investor in the States. He is also he's also an investor in the Golden State Warriors, and he was a part of Facebook when they built up. And one thing he's saying is, is that even in terms of motivating money and incentivizing climate change, he says that, when it comes to the critical point, one thing that will actually turn, or how we'll actually find the first trillion in the world is how that particular person will be invested in, sustainable energy or renewable energy or something in those lines. Another thing I read today is that the states, USA is looking at having 45 to 50% solar energy usage in the country by 2050. So, I think we can talk about these as well. We can maybe break it down and understand, okay, now this is in terms of energy creation, but then, or, usage, but then what's happening with agriculture, what's happening with manufacturing, with steel, with, concrete, little things like these. People don't realize what the ratio is to, the impact or the negative impact to the environment in comparison to, driving an electric car, things like that. Bill Gates is very big in investing. Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, is also very big in investing in these and, raising awareness about these problems as well. I think we can maybe go in deeper to talk about these as well right after a quick break. This is Tim and Chris, everyone on the buzz. We're talking about everything ESG investing, climate change, how you can be a part of it, how you can be a part of, reducing climate change, and where the money is going, what you should keep an eye on, actually, not just, being taken up by the PR stunts, or not just being taken up by particular marketing campaigns that have been done by companies, but what's the actual impact? How are they actually reducing, in a macro, how are they actually reducing the negative impacts that, their operations or their sales are making to the environment? Stay tuned, everyone. This is The Buzz with Chris and Tim. You're tuned in on Relax Radio. Good afternoon.
valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with, and your education level or your lack of education or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account. And then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies everywhere from £50 a week up to £100 million, and they're different, right? They range different.